Hey there, kids. This is chapter 22 from the Oddmire book 1, The Changeling. She's really your child? Annie Burton asked the queen as they pressed through the deep dark. Cole hung back nervously, 20 yards or so behind them, and Fable scurried 20 yards or so ahead. The girl moved through the forest like a fish through water. Annie moved through the forest more like a fish through, well, a forest, bumbling and stumbling over the uneven terrain every step of the way, but she managed to keep pace with the witch. She's yours properly, I mean, she added. You didn't steal her? Ahead of them, Fable vaulted over a fallen branch and then paused, pushing her thick curls out of her face to smell the breeze. Abruptly, she clenched her fist, closed her eyes, and held her breath. Phew! Was a bear cub again, leaves spinning around her shaggy body. Annie stared. The cub dropped to the earth. She snuffed along the ground in front of her for a few paces and presently jumped up on her hind legs. In another flurry of movement, she was back to her human form. Annie Burton shook her head in awed silence. This way, Fable called out. Yes, she's mine, said the queen. So you didn't turn her into an animal after all? She did that herself? Fable has always been a precocious child. Annie nodded. And her father? She asked. Gone, said the queen in a tone that made it quite clear that branch of the conversation had reached its end. Annie considered telling the woman about her own husband, about how her sweet Joseph had vanished shortly after their one baby became two babies, about how she had been left to raise them on her own without him. She hesitated. What was she thinking? Her husband was not a topic Annie Burton discussed with anyone, least of all a sinister sorceress who would as happily steal her children as save them. Who are you really? Annie said instead. I am the Witch of the Wood, the woman answered flatly. I'm sure you've heard the titles, Queen of... But are you actually? Are you the witch from the stories? Do you blight crops and transform into horrible monsters and eat children? The queen eyed Annie. Somebody has to, she said, shrugging. Crops don't just blight themselves, after all. A hint of smile teased at the corner of the witch's lip. But you doubt the stories I can tell. What did you say your name was? Annie Burton. Tell me, Annie Burton, did you ever believe in them when you were young? Did you ever believe that the queen of the deep dark would gobble you up if you trod too far into the wild wood? Annie swallowed and decided to be honest. Yes, when I was young. And did the stories keep you from treading too far into the wood? Annie considered. I suppose so. The queen's grin was wicked, but also somehow warm. I love those stories. They are my stories, and they serve their purpose. A squat boulder blocked their path, and the queen stepped over it as smoothly as if it were a lumpy cobblestone. The forest seemed to bend around the will of the witch, as though it were really bowing to its queen. Annie had to use both hands to scramble over the thing, and a creeping briar tore at the hem of her skirt as she slid down the opposite side. She would have to mend that later. For half a second, she marveled at the thought of ever again doing something as ordinary as sewing, and then she jogged to catch up to the wicked witch in the middle of the deep dark. But are they true? She panted. The stories about you capturing lost boys and girls? Is that why you don't age? Is it something to do with stealing children's youth or something? The queen raised an eyebrow. At length she said, I age. Then how can you be her? You're much too young. You don't look much older than I am. We told stories about an old witch when I was just a child. So you can't be the same witch, not after all this time. The queen of the deep dark shook her head, amused. Just because a story is not yours to begin does not mean it isn't yours to finish. Just because it isn't yours to finish does not mean it isn't yours to begin. Oh, said Annie, and then, sorry, what does that mean? With a sigh, the queen put her hand out and brushed the trunk of a broad pine tree. Let's try it another way, she said. I did not plant this tree. It was here long before me, and it will still be here long after I am gone. Am I important to the tree? No. What if a woodsman came into the forest with an axe and I chased him away from the tree? Would I have been important to it then? Well, yes, obviously. What if I teach my little Fable how to chase the woodsman off? And Fable teaches her children, and so on. Will I have been important to the tree then? Annie nodded. That is how stories work. Stories are important. They are born. They die. They're born again. But while they live, they chase away the woodsmen that threaten their trees. That's a lovely sentiment, Annie said, but I'm afraid you've lost me. Are you talking about you or about the stories? Yes, said the queen. Ahead of them, Fable had transformed into a bear cub once more and was turning in circles as she sniffed the earth. For several seconds, the two women stood in silence and watched her. I think I understand, Annie said softly. Do you? I don't think you're terrible at all. The queen said nothing. I think they're all just stories, Annie said. Stories to protect children from the forest. The witch's hard laugh startled Annie. No, Annie said. It is not my task to protect your idiot children from my forest, Annie Burton. I protect my forest. From children? From what children become. Up ahead, Fable appeared to have caught the scent again at last, and she hurried onward through the bracken. The queen did not rush after her at once. Something about the way she was looking at Annie made the old scary stories feel plausible indeed. This is my forest, said the queen. My trees, my beasts, my monsters, they are my children to protect. When the woodsmen come with their axes, well, her eyes narrowed as she let the sentence trail off. You would do well, Annie Burton, never to underestimate just how terrible I can be. Before Annie could find the words to respond, Fable's voice cut through the trees ahead. Ouch! Ow! Let me go! Let go! The queen's eyes flashed like fire, and in one fluid motion, she leapt forward and pulled the furry hood over her head. The cloak swelled, the forest trembled, and Annie Burton found herself staring up at a massive grizzly bear. The creature's lips curled into a grotesque sneer as she growled, deep and grumbling. A moment later, her front paws slammed into the ground, and the beast thundered off into the forest toward the sound of Fable's cries. With an effortless swipe, she cleaved a brush in two. Annie's heart thudded. Her life had turned into madness. That morning, she had wanted nothing more than a cup of tea. And now there were real goblins, sinister swamps, strange women who turned into bears, and her boys were still gone. Her morning felt worlds away. A part of her was terrified. A part of her wanted to run away, run back home to a fat old house cat and piles of laundry and lukewarm tea, but a different part of her kept pressing against her rib cage. It pulled her forward into the dark. The sound the bear was making just beyond the bushes was the stuff of nightmares. But Annie recognized that growl on another level. That growl was a sound a heart made when her boys needed her most. Her boys needed her now, just as Fable needed the witch. Annie took a deep breath as she prepared to follow the Bear Queen into the darkness. The deafening crunch of a tree cracking and crashing to the ground echoed through the woods before she could even take her first step. Birds erupted from the leaves all around her, fleeing for quieter skies. Total chaos was erupting from the forest ahead. That's why I didn't stand in front, said Cole, plodding past. Come on. And that is the end of chapter 22. And that's what 23 looks like.